Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to ETH Talk, your weekly look at the market in ETH Online. And when it comes to ETH news, CCP finally came out with some of their new plans for ETH Online. This they gave us a little bit of an outlook, and they're basically going to end the resource drought in Q4, planning to up the available resources. And I would say in all likeliness, that would be my guess. I'm seeing like a dynamic system of extra resources that then like migrate over time to different places, coming in Q4, which is why they don't just turn things around right now and say, all right, we're just gonna double all yields or anything like that. I do think that they wanna get going with the dynamic system from there. And also quick mention, maybe to warn you guys a little bit as well, if this ETH Talk turns out to be a little bit low energy, or if I don't get all the details right, I basically got my second my second vaccination from Pfizer, and guys, was a lot tougher than the first one. First one, I basically just got a little bit of soreness in my arm, but for the second one, I also had to work the day after it. I was just completely exhausted, basically. I did feel sick, which I think is good news, but I would say that I had a little bit of a fever, a headache, and I was just completely exhausted. I couldn't even finish the whole work. They had to stop sooner. So I'm still basically working my way through that. I'm a lot better. I do think we'll be just fine by the end of the day, but I gotta manage my energy here. So let's also take a quick look at the new Eden store. I haven't even taken a look at the economic numbers for June yet. All of that stuff will be later, and we are still seeing the Panther Iceblade Gorilla skins marked as new. Anything else to be noted here? Nope. And on the services, not noticing any sales or anything like that. So let's move on to the market. Start with some plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 215. Like that. All right, here we go. We've got plex themselves. You may already have seen that from the ticker. A little bit of hesitation here. We're going back down. We've got the 5-day moving average crossing the 20-day moving average, which is not a great sign if you're looking for more upwards potential. You can see that most of this time that we've gone up in the last two and a half months or so, we've been substantially above the 20-day moving average all this time. But now a little bit of a reversal here. We're talking 2.8 million for the sellers, 2.6 million for the buyers in JITA, and then in the player-owned trade hubs, we do go down to 2.74 million. So a little bit of pressure here. And then we also have 2.63 million for the buyers. Normal margin, I'm going to say. Nothing too special on that front. So a little bit of a reversal. It must also, I think, be said, we basically went back to 2.7 million, the high point for the year in a matter of 3 months. Very quick rise and sharp rise for plex. So this could definitely be part of the reason that we're pulling back a little bit. We'll see how things evolve later down the line. Next up, we've got the multiple pilot trading certificates that are actually still catching up to plex, I'm going to say, heading for 630 million, nowhere near the 700 million that was the high point for the year. It's 621 for the sellers and 592 for the buyers. So that does mean that we are working on a little bit of a pullback here already as well. Next up, we've got the skill extractors that are also going back down, obviously following the plex price very closely. And you can again see that same pattern. We reached that same high point above 310 million. And then a market says no, we go right back down quite substantially, selling now for 308 million ISK, buyers below 300 million once again. So very interesting. This pullback showing some volatility, I would say, in my opinion. I'm not sure if it's going to stay volatile, but definitely, not like a sideways movement, which for instance we saw here for a couple of months once we reached 310 million ISK. So market goes up and up and up, but then you don't have this sharp reversal here. You've got this flat area where 5-day, 20-day moving average and the daily average are pretty much in line with each other. Here, this does feel like it's a little bit different. What's the impact on the injectors? Here are the large-scale injectors, and well, they're still lagging behind plex when it comes to their movements, which honestly does make them pretty interesting investment-wise, I think. So we were just getting off of the lows, and we are back up to 630 million from 570. Definitely a tradable bounce, but pressure coming right back here. 621 million for the sellers, 592. And in GTAF 4.4, we're selling for almost 640 million. Yeah, that's definitely pressure coming in from the Tranquility Trading Tower with more supply there. That is probably also going to put an end to this decently sharp increase in price that had finally started. Definitely way later, a couple of months later than plex, but not necessarily unpredictable, which does make it very nice. But I do think that on the pullback, we may get a faster response this time. The small scale injectors are doing the same thing, went up to 130 million, and I'm kind of sure, yep, there we go, 125 million now in the Tranquility Trading Tower, 117 as well. So we definitely have at least a stalling of this increase, if not a pullback that has started here as well. For the daily alpha injectors, we are staying below 40 million ISK, which is not a great sign for activity. Because I would say that usually a lot of alpha players find this as a pretty nice goal. Get 40 million, get yourself that daily alpha injector, and you know, most of the time we're able to ask for price of above 40 million. It's still 41, so that's still okay, but 37 million for the buyers, and the fact that our average prices are below 40 million does mean that there's a bit more supply that's being dumped to these buyers. Not a lot of patience, and you can see here as well, lost well, 30 days almost, no new supply. So this is either the start of a little bit of a buyout that happened up to 41 million, which would mean that we should go back up in price a little bit coming next week. But it's also possible that there's just, you know, a little bit of dumping that's happening, not that much interest in the item itself. Although I personally would say that CCP has again confirmed that for them, at least in that roadmap, new players and new player retention is very important. And I'm sure that CCP has the metrics on daily alpha injector usage. And so I would say that, you know, for this item in particular, CCP is going to put a lot of efforts into keeping that going, so we will see. Next up, we've got the hypercores that are hesitating to go higher as well. Very nice recovery on this one too, from a low point well below 250,000 ISK. Now selling for 280, buyers coming at 267, but once again, 5-day moving average crossing that 20-day moving average. So no sideways break or pause or anything like that in the price discovery. Just a straight pullback and a market going lower all of a sudden. Next up, we've got the minerals coming in at 810. Let's take a look at these. Here is a titanium, very flat at around 4.5 ISK, not entirely unexpected, of course, under the new industry rules. At the moment, 452 for the sellers, 440 for the buyers, pretty narrow margin, sell order of 2.5 billion units, another one here. Decently high volumes, not a 670 million here as well. Keeping everything well in check, I would say, for the titanium market. Definitely not your focus if you are mining, and especially in HiSec, I would say there are, in all likeliness, slightly better options, I would say, especially in pyrite. But I would also go as far as to say, future-proofing your investments potentially. I would not focus on titanium because we have those numbers. We know that there's just less titanium needed in industry in general, but Mexalon could recover, for instance, its bottleneck status in NOSEC if CCP can introduce reasons for them to start their capital industry up once again. So this is something that I did want to mention as well. I did see a lot of very negative comments about the super sharp drop-off in just the amount produced in EVE Online, which is of course in a very high number dependent on capital and super capital production. I mean, production of a single Titan, even before the industry changes, was a very, very big endeavor. And well, we all know that we were in a period where these especially carriers and dreadnoughts were just built in such massive quantities that losing them became meaningless, which is the problem that CCP was trying to tackle with the resource changes. I'm going to personally say that just like with minerals, for instance, now we are going to get into a phase where, yep, sure, no one is making carriers, no one is making dreadnoughts, titans, and all of that stuff, because producing them comes at a higher cost than what they're worth at the moment. But that's because there is this massive glut, of course, of capitals and super capital ships, and very little reason to undock them, especially for any PvE activities or something like that, which is something that CCP is going to address, that they have very clearly mentioned in that going forward blog. But yeah, this is people say this is terrible, this is the end. I would say, economically speaking, it's kind of normal, right? They, I think, if I'm not mistaken, big Nullsec alliances used to have like massive cages of hundreds and hundreds of dreadnoughts in many different stations, so that they could dread bomb potential enemies at a moment's notice, just jump cloning in massive amounts, all getting into dreadnoughts and going out there. A lot of those ships are still out there. So who is going to want to buy a dreadnought now, want to buy a carrier now? Well, there's way more supply than there is demand, and as a result the prices are below production prices. But this is just a phase that we're going to have to go through, and just like with the minerals, where we had to go through a lot of the stocks, the same thing will have to happen for the larger ships, which one of the stated goals was to counter capital and super capital proliferation, which became a bit of a problem for the game. So I personally think that this is part of the goal, to have these industry numbers drop absolutely massively. Well, that's just a normal consequence of no one building super capitals, which is also a consequence of a couple of years ago these being so easy and so ubiquitous to make, that they were just so plentiful, and that losing them meant almost nothing to the more organized group. So yeah, we'll see how all of that evolves. Once again, we've got Pyrite next, continuing its sideways movement, sometimes trying to get back to 20 ISK, but never really succeeding. Sellers are now at 18 ISK, buyers are at 17 ISK, really narrow margin again, so the market is finding its price range. Volumes are actually decently normal, I would say. Definitely something that I personally am stockpiling, although in raw ores that I still need to find a place to compress at the moment. Then we've got Mexalon also finally stopping its descent and starting to move sideways a little bit. You can see here 5-day moving average coming back above the 20-day moving average at 60 ISK for the sellers, 56.50 for the buyers. Again, really decently narrow margin, and here we finally have that normal progression in volumes, you would say, right? Couple billion, half a billion units are the largest sell orders here. Then for Pyrite, you've got 40 million, 200 million, just below 100 million. That's still doable, but definitely a step down from Titanium. And then you've got Mexalon, where, well, 30 million is the biggest sell order. Getting 10 million together is doable, but most sell orders are actually like in the 4 or 5 million range. So I do think that this is a sign that, yeah, most of the stockpiles have been absorbed at this point, which was honestly not that easy, that difficult to do in the industry rush, since everyone that was able to do so made as many battleships, carriers, super carriers, all of that stuff. This is actually like a second glut now that I think about it, right? You have the glut from a couple of years ago, where capital ships became basically throwaway, and then here you'll have had a huge amount of capital production that happened as well in April before the industry changes. So to say that it's completely unexpected or no one is producing capital ships, well, that is really not very unexpected. But yeah, Mexalon here flattening out, finally staying at around 60 ISK, which is definitely below its historical average. I would put that at around 75, but still an okay price, although I'm not selling at the moment. If you don't have to, I do think it is better for at least Mexalon and Pyrite to hold on a little bit and see if we can't get better prices later down the line. Then we've got the one that I think is part of the metric that CCP uses as well, right? So for the first time, I would say in a very long time, CCP communicated with us, and they very clearly said that the stockpiles are in places that they're actually okay with at this point, that we've gone through most of the stockpiles. And I do think that this increase in price and then this ability of Isogen to defend 60 ISK is a very good sign that here as well we are starting to chew through all of those old stockpiles. Isogen was the mineral that had suffered the most from the resource bonanza period and never actually really recovered from these low points, these low prices, despite all of the restrictions on resources that have been made until now, where once again we are starting to see, if you look at this first page of sell orders, normal volumes in line with another step down from Exelon. No sell orders here above 10 million ISK. 4-5 million is doable, but quite a few sell orders below a million units as well. And then of course we do still have some reserves. We're talking 250 million units down here, but this is the only old reserve disruption that's still here, and that's basically pinning us at a price below 63 ISK. But eventually I do think that we will get through that, and then Isogen is set to, in my opinion, go way higher than Mexelon. And I think historically speaking, with Mexelon around 75, if I'm not mistaken, I would dare to say Isogen at like a 150 range or something like that is definitely what I remember. And then since it's now a low-sec mineral, it could be even higher. And so if there's one mineral that I would personally just hold on to as much as possible, it would be Isogen. Maybe even buy a little bit on speculation. That's definitely possible there as well. But yeah, very, very interesting. I would say that was my read on this, finally, this increased price here for Isogen. We saw those huge sell orders drop in volumes from like an old order down here that was like 2 billion units of Isogen that basically kept us below 50 ISK for months on end. But this is finally starting to stop, and then what we're seeing that is actually competing for the active sell orders is, in my opinion, in line with what we should expect long term to see in Isogen volumes, unless CCP completely opens up the spigots, of course. But I honestly think that they're not necessarily talking about just, you know, making all minerals that much more available or getting back into the old Rorcal mining days or anything like that. They may be talking about making resources more available for all of the new stuff, and then, in my opinion, as I've said at the beginning of the video, in a more dynamic way, so that you can actually outmine your region and cause yourself to get into a period of drought, you could say, which would be, I think, close to what we're seeing now. Like a baseline for drought across New Eden is what we've got now. CCP will build on top of that with dynamic systems that can then, of course, be overconsumed as well. Next up, we've got Noxium for the other low-sec mineral that's bouncing off of 1,000 ISK. So we do have a little bit of a turnaround here, in my opinion. 1,100 for the sellers and 1,030 for the buyers. Again, very narrow margins, so supply demand is very nice. I think sellers are dictating the price for Noxium very easily, which is also normal, right? Because this is sourced from low-sec mostly. And again, we get one seller of 10 million units, but then you can see that they're struggling to get more than 1 million units of Noxium together, and most sell orders are like 500,000, couple 100,000 or something like that. So normal progression in the competing sell orders here in the volumes once again. The situation may be a little bit different for nullsec. We are of course talking about very big groups with way more potential. Zydrine is very, very flat at the current price, 844 for the sellers, 828 for the buyers, and here I do think that this is basically a matter of more organization. 12 million units, 6 million units, a little bit more in availability, but that's just because it's part of trade routes that are established by larger groups. And then what is it that they can uniquely mine in their region? It is something like Zydrine, of course, and so that basically becomes part of their trade movements. When they can import high-sec minerals, for instance, or any other stuff that they need, they'll probably export some of that Zydrine, and that does mean that they can get much bigger sell orders going than, for instance, Noxium, which being dependent from LOSIC will, be way more risky and a lot more difficult to set up like a very regular big alliance level batch of Noxium. And then finally, we've got, Megasite is what we need. Also flat at that 600 ISK range, not much to say about that. They have found their footing very quickly, 610 for the sellers, 544 for the buyers. This is definitely something that's also a big difference between nullsec and lowsec and even highsec. That very high level of organization, in my opinion, is what allowed them to very quickly adapt to the new situation, regardless of whether it's more resources or in this case fewer resources, and they can still basically get the maximum out of what's available. And so you've got these very stable prices that are happening here for Zydrine. We did get the April bump where they produced and did as much as they could. Then if I'm not mistaken, we got a month where Fraternity mined crazy numbers. They really just, I think, must have grabbed every single bit of ore that they could, and they crashed the Zydrine price a little bit as a result. And now they're basically keeping that price very stable. So that organization that nullsec is very, very strong at does mean that we get decently stable nullsec mineral prices. And then there is this one exception, of course. We've got our Morphite chart that keeps going up, 130,000 ISK for a single piece of Morphite. It's 120 now for the sellers, couple coming in, and then 110 for the buyers. But this is super expensive and very interesting as well, in my opinion. In the DevBlog article about the plans, CCP said that they were actually happy with where Tech2 production was, and so that they are not planning a pause or a change for Tech2 production. So again, let's hope that when they mean increased availability of resources, they don't mean we're just going to double the amount of titanium that's available. That would not be very productive, but making some more Morphite available, perhaps in different ways, perhaps through capital sites that may have to be cleared out with like carriers and things like that, and then you can only mine it with your coal. Gotta put something on the field to make that happen, for instance. But at these prices, that does potentially become rather interesting. And so we will see, of course, what CCP decides to do, but Morphite is super expensive, and I do think a lot of players were expecting a pass on Tech2. That's actually how I understood their industry announcement in April, but it looks like they're not going to touch that. They're going to leave that as it is at the moment, which honestly we don't necessarily need a second industrial revolution in EVE Online at the moment for Tech2, but we'll see what that does to the prices actually of Tech2 ships and Tech2 items, because I do think that there was quite a bit of a rush on producing a lot of that stuff in anticipation of potentially a change from CCP, and that may not come now. Next up, we've got PI at 2250. Let's go with broadcast nodes that are still able to stay above that 1.5 million for most of the chart, 1.65 to 1.7 for the sellers, almost 1.5 million for the buyers. Definitely pretty good, nice recovery about 7-8 months ago due to the industry changes, and now that you need some broadcast nodes in some of these larger ships, well, it's not like we're not producing anything anymore, and you do see that there is this increased stable demand for now. We're able to command this price and stay there. The other PI materials, unfortunately, here is construction blocks not going anywhere, staying below 7,000 ISK on the chart. 7.5 for the sellers, 6.6 for the buyers. That is very, very low historically speaking. So here we are suffering from a lack of demand. So some advanced PI materials did get a bonus to demand with the industry changes, but all of the smaller ones, refined PI materials and things like that, are clearly still struggling. In fact, here's consumer electronics going to a one-year low point of 5,000 ISK, and my historical perspective, I mean, I may be a little bit wrong on that, but I think 12,500 ISK is actually the normal average price for consumer electronics that we've known like throughout most of my years playing EVE Online. So this feels crazy low. 5,400 for the first seller. They're trying to get to 6,000 ISK, but yeah, this is just desperate dumping of whatever they're producing. And here it is, there's just no buyers. 5,100 ISK for the first few buyers. That's really it. Super, super inexpensive at the moment. Perhaps this could turn around later down the line, but we will see how that evolves as well, of course. There's another exception that actually grew out in the last 4 or 5 months or so, which is coolants. I should say a boon above to their demand are the PI materials that are tied to fuels, because of course the industry changes did require a lot more, what are they called? I keep forgetting that word. I think we are going to find that in here, or is it components? We are doing reactions. There we go, that's it. And these reactions require fuels, and thus we can see that coolants has managed to claw its way back to 10,000 disk, 9,000 disk actually on the chart, excuse me. But it's still not a great price either. 9,200 for the sellers, 8,700 for the buyers. Still, if you're producing PI, at least your coolants you can sell. If you're producing consumer electronics, that must be feel very painful, especially if you've been doing that for a couple of years. Then we get cryoprotectant solutions. This is tied to implants, and it is continuing to go down quite substantially. Way less than 100,000 for the sellers now, and 90,000 for the buyers. I keep saying that some of these you could definitely consider to try to stockpile a little bit of this. If CCP then announces an implant set, for instance, Edencom ships, I mean, they've gotten that nice buff. I've enjoyed flying the frigates so far. Actually, a little bit of an anomaly cleaner. That's definitely pretty interesting, and I'm working my way skill-wise into the cruiser, which we'll see if I can make sort of an exploration cruiser out of that. I'm not sure if it's got a high slot for it, but I definitely want to test that out as well. And then maybe CCP could do an implant set for the Vortorn projector. Then these would be amazing investments. But I always warn you guys, don't just put all your ISK into a big purchase or anything like that. Slowly try to build up your stocks, I think, is the best thing to do in the current market, because you're clearly seeing that, generally speaking, PI is suffering from a lack of demand, and here over the last couple of months we have started to break down to well below 100,000 disk for cryoprotectant solutions. Enriched uranium is back below 10,000 disk, but that's still, again, just like with coolants, at least it's doable, right? 10,000 for the sellers, 9,100 for the buyers. Integrity response drones able to easily stay above 1.5 million, 1.8 almost for the first seller, going up to almost 1.9. Very nice. 1.7 million for the buyers as well. That's not a bad price. Mechanical parts stuck at 7k. 7,274 for the sellers, 6,800 right in between that at 7,000 disks. So a little bit better supply demand wise. We're not being dominated by the buyers when it comes to the average price, but it's clearly still not great. Then nanites continuing to go down as well. Again, slow purchase if you want to be ready for an implant announcement. 5,100 for the sellers, 4,400 for the buyers, and here textbook lack of demand. You can definitely try to grab some very cheap nanites at the moment. Nano factories back up above 750,000. All right, 780 for the sellers, 720 for the buyers. So from time to time you get a little bit of a bump in demand here as well. A little bit more volumes in the last couple of days, although this is not one of the bigger winners for advanced PI materials. At least it's somewhat defending its margin. Organic motor applicators, that's a different story. All of a sudden a big glut going down towards its 1-year low point on a complete lack of demand. 716,000 for the sellers, below 600,000 for the buyers. We haven't seen that for a couple of months, but here is the first advanced PI material that's breaking down and that's heading back to its low point, just on a complete lack of demand. Recursive computing module, very bad chart, but slowly also giving away. Now at 950,000 for the sellers, 850 for the buyers. Again, it is a lack of demand, so there does seem to be a difference between some of these advanced PI materials, like the broadcast nodes, I think needed in carriers and things like that. Once you get to that above 1.5 million, you do have a lot of that extra demand. But once you go to the others, they are starting to break down here on just a complete lack of buyers. Then we've got the robotics continuing to decline. Yeah, back at its low points, below 60,000 at this point. 60,000 for the sellers, 56,000 for the buyers. This is tied to fuels and really not making any sort of a recovery. Our self-harmonizing power cores, here again above 1.5 million, was a little bit of pressure, but it does tend to bounce once we get too close to the 1.5 million. Buyers are very close to that price point, 1.6 for the buyers. A little bit more supply is keeping this in check, but doing better than some of the others. Sterile conduits able to bump up from 1 million, that's not so bad. Our Yukomi superconductors, tied to implants, not breaking down as badly as cryoprotectant solutions. So if I were to make an investment hoping for a CCP implant announcement or something like that this week, I would obviously go for cryoprotectant solutions. But Yukomi superconductors, where are those buyers at? 60k. I mean, you could slowly buy at this price as well. And then finally, we've got the wetware mainframes. Again, one that went above 1.5 million. Went just below that about a week ago, but here is the bump back up to 1.7 million for the sellers and 1.6 for the buyers. So a little bit of a different pictures for the expensive advanced PI materials and the others, but overall, yeah, most of the PI materials unfortunately suffering from a lack of demand. Next up, advanced moon materials, 3055. Let's go and see if there's anything to spot here. Crystalline carbonite back down, still definitely a premium from most of the year with the April industry changes, but at the lower end of its current range. You could say 174 for the sellers, 156 for the buyers. That's still expensive on this 1 year chart, but basically lost a little bit of ground over the last week. Let's see if that's a trend. Next up, we've got titanium carbide for Caldari. Yeah, definitely losing a little bit of pace here as well, going back down to 175. Again, that's still a premium on the chart here compared to like the first half of the year, but clearly not flying that high anymore. 177 for the sellers, 141 for the buyers. This could be one of the reasons why we're seeing quite a few of these Tech 2 ships go lower, and why I'm having a lot more trouble selling my investments. Next up, we've got Fernite Carbide for Minmatar. Also did a little bit of a bounce, but staying at 150, which is, you know, a little bit more expensive than a year ago, but not by that much. 158 for the sellers, 148 for the buyers. And then tungsten carbide for Amar. That is basically back at the start of the year, although you could again say that we're slightly above the average of these 4 first months at 177 to 171, which is actually in line with most of the others. So the carbide type materials, looking at most of these charts, and especially the Caldari one, where is it? Right here, does seem to have absorbed all of the volatility, and we're paying a little bit more, but we are finally stabilizing on that. For the meta materials, next we've got Photonic for Galente. These have been decently stable despite all of the action that we've seen in the carbides, and yeah, here we go. Photonics 12,300 for the sellers, 11,350 for the buyers, basically right in the middle of the chart, not much to say. Then we've got nonlinear for Caldari, dropping back to 20,000, but 20 to 25 does seem to generally be its range, so we're basically at the low end of its normal range. It's still 22 for the sellers as well, 19.5 for the buyers. A little bit of pressure, but nothing too special, not like a complete crash or anything like that. Then we've got the Minmatar Plasmonics. Went below 20k and is already starting to curve back up. 19,000 for the sellers, a little bit of lack of demand maybe at 15,600 for the buyers. But this again, this chart on 1 year is actually way more stable than anything else we've got. PIs been crashing, minerals have then gone up and then gone way down after the April rush. All of this is actually surprisingly stable despite all the waves that we've encountered over the last year. And then finally, we've got the terahertz metamaterials for Amar that may be a little bit below average at 15k, but again, nothing too depressing, I don't think. 15,000 for the sellers, 14.6, right? At the low end, also the lowest margin, so that should be okay. 90k. So overall, we're basically a little bit more expensive for the carbides. Metamaterials are pretty normal. Now for the other advanced moon materials, unfortunately, the story is just like with PI, a lack of demand. So we can see here fermionic condensate starts the year at 90k, ends a little bit above 60. That's losing 30% of its value, 62 to 57 here, 1000 ISK. It's really not great. And at the moment, I would say that the pressure is on. Ferrogel heading back below 30,000 ISK as well, 40 to 30. That's definitely not great for a 1 year chart. 29 for the sellers, 28 for the buyers. Fullerite, same thing, last couple of months back with more pressure, back below 750, definitely well below average. Hypersynaptic fibers starts here at 12,000, ends below 10,000 here. We get a couple of nice spikes. These are actually tradable spikes. If you can buy, let's say at 9,000 ISK, sell at 12, buy at 9, sell at 12. That's actually pretty nice for a trade. Seems to happen every 4 or 5 months or so for the hypersynaptic fibers. But the general trend, if you look at the start of the year and then now in the last couple of months, we are well below average, lacking in demand. Nanotransistors try to defend 5,000 ISK for a little bit, which was actually the low end of its range about a year ago, but breaking down to 4,000 ISK in the last 2 weeks. Below that now for the sellers, so yeah, clearly not that great. Phenolic composites, and yeah, these two, phenolic composites and ceramic fibers, actually got an industry change bump that made them have a little bit of a premium in price compared to the rest of the year, but it's slowly starting to lose that, although we're still stable above 1500 ISK. 1600 for the sellers, 1500 for the buyers. You can see that we are back in the range from about a year ago. And then ceramics fibers, here is the bump actually on the announcement in March, went from 3 to 400 ISK, all of a sudden to 500 ISK, but here's a slow breakdown, and right at the tail end we're back below 400 ISK, so we're back in the previous range for these items as well. Impact on Tech 2 ships, that's gonna be potentially interesting. 36, 35. For this one, I am also going to put up my investments. I don't think, I'm still trying to sell the Kitsune. I did do the Guardian trade, bought for 185. That's again after taxes, sold for 200 million after taxes. So not a great profit. I was kind of thinking maybe I want to hold on and try to sell for 250 without taxes, get a very good trade going. But I was like, nah. Not sure if it's actually going to happen that quickly, so I decided to make that one happen. The rest of them still not in any real profit regions. But let's get started. Here is the Basilisk chart, surprisingly stable now all of a sudden over the last couple of months at around 230 million, 237 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. That's a decent margin. One seller here coming in at 220. Well, we clearly don't have that much demand, but supply isn't crashing the price, which would potentially create a nice opportunity. I would honestly want to wait for buyers below 200 million before making a move on that one. Next up, we've got the Cerberus. At least it's a little bit more wavy, and we did reach this low point here again, well below 250. We are talking 246 million for the sellers, 221 for the buyers. Again, unfortunately, not enough margin, a slow upwards pressure must mean that there is also increased demand and slightly increased supply to get this going and to basically have both of them move in tandem. This is not the place where I want to buy or sell. Then the Guardian, you can see here that I sold on the second bump up, managed to buy it down here for like, I don't know, 183 or something like that, I think it was. Then we got the taxes brought up to 185. At the moment, we are selling for 217 million, buyers at 188. This is a much better margin. If you really wanted to, you could try to grab a Guardian below 190 million and try to do the trade again. But yeah, it's not the bottom by any means either. At least we got a little bit of volatility here. Then we've got the Hound. All right, finally breaking down. That is potentially not bad. Am I holding Hounds? No, but we are below 25 million on the chart. It's still almost 28 for the sellers, but the buyers are starting to drop off to 23 million. Now, I'm personally, it's only, it is 43. it's a lot of them, but I'm going to wait a little bit longer. If there's enough supply out there, they could still crush that. And if we could get close to 20 million, that's like a no-brain purchase. Not sure if it is going to happen, we will see. But at the moment, the Hound does start to already look interesting on the chart to maybe do a purchase. The Ichthyorsa continuing its slow decline, although it's stalling, but we did go below 700 million on average. 610 million for the sellers, 625 million for the buyers. Now this looks like a margin, man, that's great for trading. Fortunately, we're probably not going to get great volumes. Well, actually almost 20 a day, that's not that bad for the Ichthyorsa despite this price. Maybe something to look into. Try to buy cheap, try to sell high. Okay, interesting. That's a very, very wide margin on this downturn. Maybe a purchase could be interesting, actually. Then we've got the Ishtar, not the chart you want to see. We're right back in the middle at 230. 230? Yeah, 230 on the chart. It's actually 228 here for most sellers, 210 for the buyers. Way too narrow margin, not the place to be trading. Stealth bombers slowly looking better. Here's the Manticore heading for that 25 million bottom. This does look interesting. 28 million for the sellers, 22 million for the first buyer. This is all the buyers there are, so you can buy well below 25 million at this point, and the potential for the Manticore is obviously well above 25 towards 30 and even more million ISK. So Manticore is in a buy spot in my opinion. Then we've got the Munin flat at 200 million. Yeah, again, that's not where I want to make the move. 200 for the sellers, 183 for the buyers. That's not even, in my opinion, enough margin to say I'm gonna risk a buy. Nope, that's a no for me. Nemesis Stealth Bomber, also below 25 million. Not that bad. 25.5 for the sellers. Quite a bit of selling here. 21 million for the buyers. Could be a little bit early, could be the time to try and grab one well below 25 million ISK as well. It's a little bit, feels a little bit more gambly than the Manticore, but potentially the Nemesis is in an interesting spot as well. Then we've got the Oneros back above 180. You could have maybe bought like last week. Yeah, 161. You could consider buying the Oneros. One warning though, volumes for the Oneros like 10 a day, that's about what you can expect, so never buy more than one. I would say a little bit more risky. Then we've got the Panther, which we tended to have in here for trying to gauge basically the cost of Tech 2 production, but then CCP came with the buff, which was very quickly absorbed, and we're right back on the average. So unlike the Marauders, these Black Ops battleships do not have a maintained increased price because of their changes, their buffs. 1.2 billion for the sellers and almost 1.1 billion for the buyers. Not a lot of demand, but yeah, I was more adding these battleships to get an idea of potential production costs since they are large Tech 2 items. Then we've got the Purifier, another stealth bomber going below 25 million. It's on the chart, 25.7 for the sellers, 21 for the buyers. Yeah, again, for me, that would be a yes. Try to buy as close as possible to 21 million. You can see here, 22 should be very easy to actually trigger as long as you don't spook the market with trying to buy 30 of them or anything like that. But Purifier, Nemesis, and the Manticore actually to me look like they are potentially in a nice spot to try to make a trade happen. Then we've got the Scimitar, finally a little bit more volatility back on the upside to 230 million for the sellers, 200 million for the buyers. If you happen to have bought one about a month ago for a low price, well below 200 million, you can probably try to take a bit of profit. Then we've got the Widow, another Black Ops battleship that has basically recovered from the CCP buff. 1.3 billion for the sellers, 1.1 billion for the buyers. And then finally the Zealot with a surprise bump up to 250 million. Yeah, 253 for the sellers, 212 for the buyers. Not sure if this is just tick to volatility. It is a lot of volumes, so I'm not sure. Is this nullsec related, Zealot fleets coming in or something like that? Or maybe is it due to the Alliance tournament? Is that a possibility? I'm really not sure. Let me know in the comments if you get an idea. Still, if you took the Zealot gamble, which I never told people to do and I never did myself because of the terrible volumes, you are looking at a great sell opportunity for Zealot at the moment. I'll quickly take a look at what I'm still holding. So Confessor for 35, selling for 40.7 million. Yeah, maybe slight profit, but nothing too great. Endurance, right, that's pretty much in line, 27 million. I do have one Manticore that I bought for 27 million, so I bought way too early. I could probably buy one like 4 million less than this. Then we got an Oneros for 165. Did that one? Yeah, maybe I could sell for a tiny profit, but I don't mind holding on to that. And then the Prospect is not going anywhere yet either. But those are the rest of my investments, and I'm still trying to sell my Kitsune at 35 million, which at the time was the lowest seller by quite a little bit, but we were undercut very quickly. So unfortunately, we could not take advantage of this jump. It would have been like my best trade on the list here, but unfortunately that has not triggered yet. We'll see, maybe on a little bit of volatility or something like that we can get lucky. Otherwise, yeah, a failed trade is something that can happen as well. Tech tree ships next. We just saw timestamp 4510. So there we go. We just saw the Confessor. Yeah, I thought I was buying low, but unfortunately, summertime, and we are basically in a pressure situation for the prices here. Starting to hit 40 million, 40.7 for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. That's basically pretty damn flat. Then we've got the Hecate, also very flat, well above 45 million though, a bit of premium on that one, 47.5 for the sellers and 43.5 million for the buyers. Really narrow margin here, so we're paying that premium, and yet it's not like drawing in a lot of production, giving some room for the Confessor to go back and be priced. I'm a little bit surprised by that, that there's now quite a bit of difference actually in price range. Here is the Jackdaw, for instance, a little bit different as well. Well above 40 million, but not above 45. 42 for the sellers, 38 for the buyers. And again, supply-wise, it's nothing too special, so feels like we can stabilize here quite nicely. The Zwepel did have that bump that was then very quickly absorbed, which is normal for the Zwepel, the least popular one. You can see demand is basically not there to maintain a premium for all that long. 44 million for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers. We're basically normalizing on this one quite quickly. The cruisers, probably still paying premiums for those because you don't lose skill points if they blow up anymore. Legion back down a little bit at 193 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. Honestly, with these, I don't think here's the Loki, right? Still well above 200 million. Then we get the Proteus back below 200 million. All right, buyers 178. Yeah, I wouldn't be jumping in on any of this, to be honest. If you want to fly one, of course, buy it, but to be speculating at these prices right now doesn't feel like something that I want to do. I would need to see a little bit more price action in the current situation, with now these ships no longer having a penalty to skill points when they're destroyed, and then try to find the dips, which it's gonna be a different price point than, let's say, 180 for the Tengu. At this point, there's gonna be a higher price to be paid for those. So yeah, Tech Tree Cruisers, honestly, they're basically a little bit more popular, a little bit more expensive because of a CCP change again as well. So not the time to be speculating on those. And the destroyers honestly are surprisingly stable despite relatively big differences in prices and a little bit of volatility in this vehicle. So this is also not, in my opinion, a great time to try and make trades happen in any of the Tech Tree ships at the moment. And then for our extra products, people requested gas products again, so we will take a look at those. 4810. Gonna just try to go through these decently quickly then and see if we can spot any trends or anything like that. So the cerosins, I'm gonna call them, not really sure what we want to call it, but booster gas clouds, I do think they're used in regular industry at this point as well, but not all of them. So amber cytocerosin here, basically back where we were at the start of the year. An April bump is quite noticeable, but we have fully recovered. Volume wise, we're definitely doing a little bit more than a year ago. Amber mycoceracin, definitely a premium, right next to no value about a year ago, and now heading for well above 25k, 30k for the sellers, 25,000 for the buyers. One of those to hunt, and here are the sustained volumes after the industry changes. Quick note on this as well, CCP has announced that they are working on gas compression, on moon goo compression, and on special cargo holds for moon goo and for gas as well. So the logistics around gas could become easier, which could actually put a little bit of pressure on these prices as well. Next one, Azure 50k, always had a little bit of a market and a price, but that's really it, probably because it's so rare. Then the Azure one, the mycoceracins apparently are the ones that really do have that increased demand due to industry. 25k at the moment from, well, next to completely worthless. Cytoceracin here, a bit of a bump, but back down into a normal range. And then the mycoceracin, same thing here, right? That's the trend, very noticeable here. Slight uptick at the tail end here as well for Celadon mycoceracin, heading for 50,000 ISK a unit. Definitely something that, you know, if you find it, it can be a nice payday. Then we've got the golden one, actually a little bit more expensive than at the start of the year, because you see that the volumes aren't there. And then the myco here again, 40k, worthless at the start of the year. And there's the post-industry volumes. So we're just going to go through the list on this one. Lime back in line with about a year ago, a bit of a bump in May, but that's it. And then the myco worthless, heading for 50. Is it 50,000 for the sellers? Actually, it's 67,000 is for the sellers, 46,000 for the buyers. And again, way more sustained volume. So this is clearly that trend. All of these cytoceracins had an April-May bump, but have basically normalized. And all the mycoceracins, or most of the mycoceracins, this one is an exception, have a bit of a premium in price. They definitely have those increased volumes. Vermilion stuff, and then here is the vermilion mycoceracin. So yeah, again, worthless. And what are we selling at? Not great, but it's still 30,000 ISK per unit. And then the viridian one with the myco, very, very noticeable volumes here yet again. So that's the trend. I don't expect this to change, especially not the volumes, but price-wise, again, some of the changes from CCP that could make these logistics easier could put a bit of pressure on these prices, but that is for later down the line, of course. And I'll also take a quick look at the fullerenes with C28, a little bit upwards, definitely above average at 8,000 ISK almost for the sellers, buyers coming in at the same price. C32 also taking off from a one-year low point, so not from a great place, but 24,000 now for the sellers, 16,000 for the buyers. Very sharp, maybe a little bit of speculation or an announcement, something in the announcement that I missed. C320 also up for the last month or so, back above average. C50, I'm gonna go with the above average and up for the last month. C450, look at that, last month again, very nice from a low point, but back at 60,000 ISK. C60 is up, C70 is up. Yep, that's the trend in all of the fullerenes. They are definitely going for higher prices all of a sudden, with most of them well above average. And there you go. That was also a quick look at the gas prices. Thank you very much for watching, guys, as always, and I'll see you next time.